if it applies to him, it certainly applies to me.
Well, we're amazed by your and the reason we asked you on the show today is because we have known you for quite a while. My husband, Michael, has taught you at Dixie State University, and I've known you from the community theater around here. And what most impressed us was what we like to have is people on the show that actually are doers, not just talkers. And you have gone out and created.
I barely qualify, if that's what you're looking for.
Oh, no. We have watched you do so many things over the years, and lately with your magician work, we're very impressed. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show. We know you're very busy.
Well, thank you for having me. I like to, I don't know, I like to talk about art, so, you know.
Yes. Well, we love having you. Now, Trey, for those of you, those in our audience who do not know who you are, can you explain a little bit about who you are? You're from St. George originally.
Yeah, well, no, I'm actually originally from upstate New York, a small place called Watertown.
Watertown.
About, I think, like 15 minutes from the Canadian border.
Oh, fantastic.
So you're almost Canadian.
Almost Canadian. My grandfather was Canadian. I never met him. He passed away before, long before I was born. But yeah, he actually was Canadian, and I served an LDS mission in Canada. Oh, so I think I've got a pretty good, you know, claim to a certain amount of Canadianness.
Canadicity.
Yes, you know, I can say "a" like the best of them.
Yeah. And you're a graduate of Dixie State University, correct?
Sort of.
Uh-oh, Trey. No, I heard you work. Explain.
I technically have not graduated.
Trey, you just said it on the radio.
Some things fell apart, and I just had to look at it, and just for time and money, and I just thought I hit that point where part of my decision was that I felt like waiting to finish the degree was holding me back more than just not having it. And I made that decision a little over 3 years ago, and I haven't really gone anywhere since. So, you know, it's not the best justification anymore. But
yes, but you did take classes.
I did take classes. I was here for far too long to you know, even if I had the degree, I was here for far too long, and so.
Well, we've seen you do some amazing work. You were Tevye, correct, in Fiddler on the Roof.
Tevye, that was a lot of fun.
And I remember doing a Crucible.
Crucible, yes, that was a frighteningly long time ago now. We're coming up on
9 years?
It'll be
10 years.
It'll be 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, this winter spring time.
Oh my word!
10 years. My goodness.
We've aged.
Well, I am going to tell you, one of the things that impresses us is the fact that you do so much. A Renaissance man and such. Now, you haven't quite finished your degree yet, but that has not stopped you from doing a lot. One of the things that I'm very impressed by, and this is something I'm excited to get into because we haven't really done this much on this show, is the art of magic.
Yes.
And we have had actors on. We've also had musicians on and composers, and we've had curators of museums on and such. I don't think we've had a magician yet.
No, not yet.
Well, there are a few of us in town. I know. I would venture to say most. I don't know if that's even necessarily accurate, but and that's yeah. So there's a few of us, and we do some stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's not something I would think of in St. George. You know, who would think that a magician would be around? You'd think of that. Well, like Dad's going to pull out the tricks from the closet, for the birthday party. But you are a professional performing magician around town.
I like to call myself a semi-professional,
but that's all right.
Because I still do a fair amount of performing with no guarantee of payment. So,
so far, yeah.
Yeah, so far. But and that actually was one of the things. I first got into magic as a little kid, like a lot of people do, and I did. Pretty much got as far as I could with what I found readily available. I looked at all the magic books in the library, at least in the kids section. It never really occurred to me to check the adults, or the general section. I hate that the word adult just sounds awful when you put it before anything. The adult section of the library. I never ventured out into the general section of the library. For magic books, it didn't strike me that there would be any as a kid, but I hit this point where I'd read all those. I'd had the same few magic kits that everybody could get at Walmart or Toys R Us or whatever, and I just kind of hit the point that there was nowhere else to go. I felt I had I didn't know any other magicians to learn from. There were no magic shops in town. The best was, the Joker at the time.
Oh, yes.
Had some magic stuff. A lot of it was like the SS Adams. Technically, it's a practical joke, but it will also call it a magic trick type stuff.
Yeah.
And they had some good stuff too. But I'd done pretty much everything I could. And I think 7th grade wound up being the last time I'd performed magic at a talent show at school. And one of the clinchers is, even though everybody said I did really well, was one kid did come up and say, "Oh, my brother has that same magic kit."
Oh,
and that just kind of really, I'm like, yeah, there was a touch of that. And also there was this guy in my middle school who was doing really advanced stuff. Like he was doves and that type of stuff in some very well put together shows in the bigger, like school-wide talent show things. And I realized that was never going to be me. And I still know that's never going to be me, but that's not what I want to be. So, but I just kind of fell out of it. And I got into high school and I was playing in the band and I was doing drama. And for 2 years, I actually even played football. So I was doing so much that, a lot of things like that kind of fell to the wayside. So yeah, there was a lot of that just, it became something that was still an interest, but nothing I was actively doing anymore. All my magic stuff had gone into a fairly surprisingly small cardboard box that sat in my shelf. And then I discovered when I was working at a hotel, an overnight shift, and you couldn't get on you could use the computer, but you couldn't get on Facebook. And for a while, we couldn't use YouTube either. We got YouTube back and we got television privileges back, but for a while we couldn't do those things. So just looking for things to keep me awake at night, I stumbled across, and I don't even know how, but I stumbled across a website called magictricks.com, and it was an online magic shop. And it suddenly hit me, I don't need a magic shop anymore. And I started watching, and it's a wonderful site. Sells some fairly basic stuff, but the guy who runs it, who used to own a brick and mortar shop, does demo videos of every trick. And so you could see what the trick looked like before you ordered it. And I just started watching them and getting really interested. And I think within the first couple nights of going to that site, I made up this list that was this pipe dream at the time of the different tricks that I would want to buy and the books I'd want to get in the DVD, all of this, if I were going to really pursue this. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to really pursue this, but I'll keep this list. And I slowly started getting it. I got a couple of the books. I got a couple of trick decks. I got a couple things like that, and was just having a little bit of fun with it. And that was another thing too that had always struck me as, you practice and you practice and you practice. If you never get a chance to perform, it just becomes a frustration. And I stumbled across a video of one of my favorite magicians. I'll mention him because he actually just passed away this last weekend, a man named Ricky Jay.
Ricky Jay, yes.
Fantastic card magician. But he actually closed his famous card show, Ricky Jay and His 52 Assistants, with a rendition of the Cups and Balls, which has nothing to do with cards, but he closed his card show with it. And I watched that, and I'd been familiar with the Cups and Balls. I'd seen little snippets of people performing it. And I'd had, from one of my magic kits, a little set of plastic cups with those pom-pom balls. But I watched him do this, and I realized that was such a cool routine, and there was something there that I'm like, that's what I want to learn. That's what I want to get next. I knew I couldn't do it with those plastic cheap cups, so I bought a cheap metal set, aluminum set. And so I bought the cups. I bought the set of cups and balls. I bought a DVD course, and this was before I had any knowledge I was going to get to perform at any point. I just bought those because I thought that's something I'm going to play with. And then within a couple of weeks of that arriving, I was involved in a play. And it was a children's theater play. And I was kind of getting really tired with it. I almost didn't do the play just because I was feeling a need for a rest. And so then I was involved in this play, and I had what I thought was a small role that wouldn't require too much, but I was still spending way too long at rehearsal. I was frustrated with what I thought was even for a children's theater show, kind of a silly script. I was had frustrations with the director, frustrations with a lot of things, and I needed something to bring me sanity. And the director talked about wanting to put us out in the lobby after the show in character to greet the kids because it was children's theater, and it hit me. I'd started doing something one day during the scene where I played him as a wizard. And as I was talking to the lead character, I grabbed her by her hands and spun her around in this circle that I don't think anybody knew, but in my head, I was stirring a cauldron with her. Mm-hmm. And because I realized my character was magic. And then it hit me. I'm like, well, I could do magic tricks. And I went to the director and I said, well, how about if instead of just after the show, what if I'm out before the show doing magic? And I kind of lied about where I was. I said, I do magic. I hadn't seriously done magic in like a decade.
Yeah.
And he said, well, practice, get some stuff together and show me. And so I went home and immediately started buying more stuff because I'm like, okay, what do I want? And I started
you got to keep
trying
your
to
word
think,
now.
what's going to make, what's good for kids? What's good for this? What's good for... And I amassed a pretty good amount, and I built a little case with a tabletop and put it together, and I showed him, after a couple of weeks, showed him what I had, and he liked it, and I ended up doing magic out in the lobby. And that was great. It was wonderful. And again, it would have been just another thing. That wooden box now would have gone on my shelf if not for Gary Payne, who was working as one of the ushers at the theater, came up to me because he and all the ushers would watch me as well. And he just came up. He said that year he was in charge of the street performers at the Dickens Festival. This was like October, and he just came and he said, would you be interested in coming doing magic at the Dickens Festival? And I said, sure. And so that just started, I don't think I really bought anything new in between that and the Dickens, but I kept practicing and I kept going, and I had to put together a costume. I'm wearing part of it now. The vest is new.
Yes, it's very nice.
The vest is new as of last year.
By the way, we are broadcasting. We are broadcasting on Facebook and YouTube right now.
So check out the vest. Yes, it's very nice.
The
very
vest
nice.
is store-bought. The tie I made myself.
Oh, dear.
But
it's very classy.
so I put together a costume, which every year has gotten a little bit better.
Nice.
And I went and I performed, and that just kept me going. And I didn't really do much in the interim between. I think I had like one or two little opportunities to go do a little magic here and there. But the next year I went back to the Dickens Festival, and then the next year, and this year is actually my 7th year doing magic at the Dickens Festival.
No way!
I had
7
to sit down.
years now.
I had to do the math based on the changes in my costume. So the first year,
7 years.
I borrowed a brown bowler hat from the costume department here at Dixie. The next year, I had a top hat, a real top hat, which I still have. It's out in my car. Then it was the next year that I finally had a real frock coat. And then it was the next year after that that I had that I first curled my mustache.
That's important.
And then it was the year after that I got this vet. And so yeah, I'm at like 6-7 years. It's
well, Trey, you mentioned the Dickens Festival. What is the Dickens Festival for people who have never heard of this before?
The Dickens Festival is the first weekend of December, which means, like in this year, since the 1st of December is a Saturday, it's mostly in November. But it's always whatever weekend is going to have the first of the first weekend days of December. It goes Wednesday through Saturday, and it's a big Christmas. Basically, it's an indoor street fair at the Dixie Center. But the whole idea is to set it up like Dickensian Victorian London. And so you go inside, and the vendors decorate up their booths, and are supposed to be in as much of a costume as they can. There's entertainment. There are street performers who run around dressed as characters from Dickens stories. A Christmas Carol, of course, being the big one. But all of that, and so that's part of why my magic costume for this is this vest and ascot and top hat and all that is they want this to feel like you've stepped into Dickensian London, or just stepped into this other world. The lights are down, so even if you show up in daytime, you're sort of in a nighttime
You're taken
world.
into another world,
And it's a lot of fun. They do number of shows, little condensed performances of the musicals Oliver and the musical Scrooge, and a number of other things. There's sales. There's food. I'm going to be there tonight and tomorrow night. I can't be there on Saturday, unfortunately.
Oh,
but,
no.
So if you want to see Trey perform, go either tonight or tomorrow night.
Yeah.
What time?
Well, I'm going to head over there right after this. And then tomorrow, tomorrow I work until 3:30, and then I need some time to go home, change, gather my stuff, and head over. So probably in the 4:30 to 5 range until 9 o'clock is when it closes.
And where do they find you at Dickens? Is there like a front big gate they go through? Or
sort of. You go into the if you go into the Dixie Center, where I was last night, and it's probably where I'm going to be all 3 nights, is actually out in the lobby of the Dixie Center. I am not by what is the main entrance into the convention floor. I'm down by what most people would consider the main entrance of the Dixie Center, where like the handicap parking is and stuff like that. I'm down that end. And if I'm not there, it means I'm wandering around the festival, partly looking at things, partly maybe doing a little bit of
eating.
Yeah, possibly eating, possibly
yeah.
sometimes, you stand out there for a while, you got to go sit down for a bit, grab a drink. Sometimes, it's Christmas, it's cold, I'm wearing a coat, but I'm sweating, so sometimes I just have to go cool off. Or, as I wander the festival, I do a little bit of close-up and things like that, close-up magic, tricks right in front of your face. Last night I was doing a great little bit where I'd walk around and I'd throw a ping pong ball in the air and catch it on my nose.
Wow.
And that was getting a really good response. So
That's
I might
great.
do it again tonight.
Do it again? It's a crowd pleaser, yeah.
Well, I guess the majority of your tricks seem to be really close up and sleight of hand.
And I've really gravitated towards that. That's part of why I said, I have no problem with the idea of not being the dove and rabbit man. That's something that really just, as I was getting more into it, I realized that's what I wanted to be more, was that. I like performing for a bigger audience, and in fact, yesterday I did a stage show at the Dickens Festival of Magic. But even at that, it's based more on some sleight of hand and things like that. And that's where you get into card tricks, the cups and balls, which is a mainstay of particularly my street performance. So if you catch me at the Dickens Festival, you'll probably see me doing that.
Sweet.
Well, I'll tell you, there has always been a stigma, as far as I've seen, between sleight of hand, which is the smaller magic tricks, if you will, and the larger stuff, the stuff that David Copperfield does, or Doug Henning. And even as a kid, I mean, we've all had that uncle, who just will not leave us alone and will not stop pulling quarters out of our ears or things like that. And you mentioned those kits that everybody has had, but there's this kind of this shift I've seen when people are really serious about figuring out magic, where they start looking at putting their own tricks together, their own illusions. And you mentioned buying them. I actually had a group of friends that were into magic and myself when we were kids, and we would start trying to build our own illusions using toothpicks and things of that sort, and wooden boxes and things like that. Did you ever do that, try to manufacture your own?
I've tried a bit. I'm better at it than I used to be. I know as a kid, when I'd try to make up my own tricks and build it, I just didn't have the brain to think of things that way, I guess, and I would come up with stuff that just didn't really come together. I've built some of the stuff that I use. Yesterday I closed my show with I call the trick magic show in a box. It's technically what's known as a square circle, and I actually built mine with the help of a magician friend in town, a man named Pete McMillan. He's a skilled magician and a skilled craftsman with a very nice workshop, and he said he'd help me if I needed to build anything. So I, a little over a year ago, was working with him in his shop, and we built that prop. What I love about things like that is, you can buy them, and of course I actually built it partly because I could make it the design I wanted, and it was considerably cheaper than anything comparable that for sale. But once you have it and you know how it works, that especially with a prop like that, that doesn't complete it. That you can't just do whatever. I mean, the basic idea is it's an empty box and an empty tube, and you put them together and start pulling things out of this empty box. And if that's all you do, it's boring. Nobody likes that. You've got to figure out what you're going to pull out, why you're going to do that, and develop a routine. And that's why I call it Magic Show in a Box. That's my routine, as I present it as a whole magic show in this little wooden box. And and that's something I feel like I've been getting a lot better at over the last little while, or playing with. There's a card trick I do a lot that I learned, again, I learned from Pete. He was spearheading a little magic club locally about a year ago.
Really?
Well, a little over a year
magic
ago.
Club.
Magic Club. We met for a couple months.
How many of you?
Let's see. Pete, at our most, I think we had maybe about eight to 10. That was not regular attendance, though. There were a couple of people who didn't show up very often, but we had a couple occasions of just like 2 or 3 of us. And since that boiled down to pretty frequently 2 at most, that's why the club fizzled out. But for a couple meetings, it was really something good. You know, we had about 2 really strong meetings of sharing ideas and things. And Pete showed us all this card trick that it just, you know, it was this 4-card trick that what at that time, what in the biz is known as a packet trick. It's a trick with just, you know, just a certain number of cards. And some magicians will literally have a little packet, a little wallet that holds those cards so they don't have to carry a whole deck. And he showed it like that. And it was this cool little count with then this surprise reveal that just, you know, where you made a card change color. And I got thinking about, I loved it. I practiced it and I would do that. And I did it, performed it several times. And I kept thinking, like, what if the surprise reveal was something different? What if instead of just changing color, what if it changed to, you know, and I thought, what if it changed to a selected card? You know, I have someone pick a card, put it back in the deck. And I had to think, well, then I need to get all these cards from a deck down to the 4, down to the in the right, or all of this. And so I just sat down and started thinking about that and figured out exactly how to get from A to B to C. And that's one of the things I'm actually pretty proud of that I because it's the first time I've effectively done that myself, where I just, you know, here was the trick as it was, and I wanted to do something a little different with it, and I sat down and figured out how to do it, and I do that pretty frequently now.
But isn't that the challenge for magicians? I've heard that there are really only 8 tricks out there when it comes down to it. You can make things appear, you can make things disappear, you can break things apart and put them back together, you can have them levitate, you can have advancement of time or declining of time. These really are just small tricks, and I'm using that term not diminutively, no pun intended, but if you can do it with a card, you can do it with a tiger. You just have to figure out how to do it.
Wow.
Well, and it's like they say, you know, there's what is it, like 8 notes in modern Western music.
Right.
But, you know, look at all the different music that we actually get, you know. And that's the same thing. You figure all those things out. Is how am I going to change the order? How am I going to make this, you know, equal what I want it to equal in the end?
Well, that's right. There's a television show I'm very, very fond of, and it's called Fool, Penn and Teller.
Yes.
And, of course, Penn and Teller, you know, some of the greatest illusionists who have come under fire. And by the way, I want to do a little disclaimer here on this show. I hope we don't destroy the concept of magic for an audience by talking about tricks and the ways we do them. Magicians are notoriously secretive about their methods. And by the way, I'm going to stay away from the words from here on out, trick, their methods of creating this magic. I mean, even to the point, when I was a kid and I started looking at these books, my parents were very worried. They were worried about me for a lot of reasons, frankly.
Yes.
But I will tell you, I started to get those books, like you were saying, from the library. And they said, well, why are you destroying it for yourself? Why are you destroying the concept of magic by seeing how things were done? And these books, I mean, these were, you know, how do you make a woman disappear? How do you use a mirror? Things like that. And, you know, the joy and the magic of it has never left for me because of what you're saying. How do you do it? How do you make it happen?
There are 2 types of people in the world, I find. One is, because I was looking at this, and I came up with this when I was looking at a thing once that said, you know, 12 pictures that'll ruin your childhood. And the pictures were like photos where you could see Jim Henson working Kermit the Frog. And I'm like, how does this, I mean...
That just makes it wonderful.
Stuff like that. And I realized that there are 2 types of people in the world. There are those who go, oh, it's a trick. Oh, there's a man working the puppet. And, you know, somebody created it. It's not special. And then there are those people who say, somebody gets to create that?
Mm.
And that's to me, that's all the difference is, did somebody, somebody made it up, or somebody gets to make this up.
Yeah.
Somebody gets to create and make magic for people, and that it's,
That's what I love about the television show.
Yeah.
Is that you've got Penn and Teller, and these magicians get to come on, these magicians
Yes.
and illusionists, and I mean, they're all these little teeny distinctions, but they get to perform their routines, their personality that they've put on top of these common tricks.
Oh, yeah.
And Penn and Teller, they get to, see, hey, can we see you doing what we know how to do? Or have they been fooled by what's called misdirection, where they're thinking about something that the magician wants you to be thinking about while they're doing something else? And I have to say, that's where the real magic comes for me. There is still an illusion done by Doug Henning, who was one of my idols. I still have the ace card in my magic deck that he actually autographed.
Oh, that's cool.
I waited for an hour and a half after his performance in the freezing cold in Washington, D.C. for him to come out and sign this card. And he was delightful, by the way. But there's a trick he did, and I have been trying to figure it out. I can find no documentation on this trick. There are a lot that you can. If you do enough digging, you can find a lot of this stuff. But I've actually on purpose stopped trying to find how he did it, and am living in the wonder of it, because that's the one trick that reminds me of that joy of looking at a trick and saying, it must be magic, because I cannot figure it out.
Yeah, that's I mean, I love stuff like that. There's so much of that type of thing, and there are times when I do get a tiny tinge of like, I learned this trick, and now I'm doing this one that amazed me. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I could go back to not knowing, but at the same time, the joy of when I do it as well as I can, and I know that I've given someone else what I had when I saw it. One of the best compliments I've received, I actually got just today. A good friend of mine, he's been on your show, Adam Mast.
Yes.
Just sent me a text because he and his family came to my stage show yesterday, and he just sent me a text saying that one of his kids is now saying that they want to be a magician after coming to my show.
Yes.
I'm like, I don't care if his child actually does become a magician. Just the fact that, after the show they would say that means the world to me. That's exactly what it is. There's one trick I do pretty frequently in my close-up, especially at the Dickens Festival. I do a routine with sponge balls. I put one in my hand, one in the kid's hand, and then make the one in my hand disappear, and they've got both of them. It's a very classic, beautiful trick, and one of the reasons I still do it, and one of the reasons I learned it in the first place, was when I was a very little child. I was at this convention. This was when I was still living in Watertown. We moved here when I was 10. And this clown came up and did that trick for me. And it just, I was going nuts. I went home and with every toy ball I had was trying to figure out how he did it. And when I was getting ready to do magic before that play, and I thought I need something good for kids, that was the first thing I thought of. I have no idea who this clown was. I know it was just some local guy in Watertown. I don't know what his name was, anything like that, and I know that there's no way he'll ever know that effect he had on me, but he did, and that's a special thing, I think.
Yeah.
Well, there's something kind of wonderfully mysterious about magicians that I found. Even you were influenced by this guy. You have no idea who he was.
Yeah.
There is kind of this sense that a magician blows in on the wind and then blows
David
away.
Copperfield, yes.
And that's I had a friend named Mick Mangan, who's an author in England, and he was trying to do a comprehensive history of magic. And he was, I walked into his office one day. He was one of my advisors in my program, not a magic program, but he was very interested, as was I. And he was looking kind of depressed. And I said, hey, what's the problem? Is it difficult? Are you having trouble with your book? And he was like, I hate magicians. And, I said, well, why? And he was like, getting a straight answer out of a magician is the hardest thing in the world. Because when you think about it, these magicians, if you ask them their story, it's never, or very rarely, like the conversation we're having. It's, well, I was traveling in the depths of Africa, and I came upon a shaman, and he imbued me with this power. And he had so much trouble finding who the actual magicians were. You remember this guy as a clown, but, these magicians, they never have names like Bob or Steve, or in the case with the tragic loss we just had of Ricky Jay, one of who inspired so many. But you have names like Stupendo, the Marvelous, or things of this sort, and they become these myths and these legends that are impossible to track down.
Yeah, I mean the thing with the names, that's something I keep thinking of. People keep asking me, well, what's going to be your stage name? I'm like, I'm just going to use my real name.
Trey.
I'm Trey the Magician. And Trey Patterson. I'm not Trey the Magician, sorry. I'm Trey Patterson.
Trey Patterson.
Magician Trey Patterson, you could call me, or something like
there
that.
You go.
But I'm just Trey. And my friend Pete, the magician, said that my fellow magician friend Pete, I'm losing the ability to speak coherently.
It's okay. It happens all the time.
He was telling me at one point when I said that I wasn't thinking that, he said, well, why would you give up a name Trey? Because there's a card reference in there, because a 3 is known as a tray.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that's, and it's even spelled the same way. So I'm like, yeah, why would I give that up? Aside from that, I just like the simplicity. I've had someone say, well, don't you want to be the, Speldini or something like that? I'm like, or the amazing, all these things. I'm just like, no, I look at it, I'm like, that's very old hat anyway. I just look at most of the magicians I really admire, with exceptions like Slidini, who was just fantastic. But, Harry Anderson was just Harry Anderson. Paul Daniels was just Paul Daniels. It doesn't matter if that was their real given name or not. It's still just the name of someone you'd meet on the street, and so I'm like, why should I change it? I don't think I should. I think I'm fine where I am. And
well, it's one thing to be inspired by, of course, the big names. I mentioned that Doug Henning was a big name. Harry Blackstone Jr. I got a story about him that we can say later on, I guess. Okay. I actually did get to see him perform, and he was embarrassed in the wrong way. We'll talk about what can happen that way. But
don't tell Trey that just before he goes on.
Absolutely. Don't mess
Warning,
up.
Yeah.
No, well, and actually that does happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
The trick I learned, and I'm not going to ask if you use this, Trey, but when I was doing close-up magic and such, I had a very good friend from Al's Magic Shop in Washington, D.C., which was one of the hubs of magic. And he just said, you know what? If you mess up a trick, act like something amazing just happened, and most of the time the audience would be like, oh, I guess I missed that, but that was wonderful. And I actually used that a few times. I was doing a card trick for some kids, and it was one of the classic tricks. I had them pick a card, and I had them put it back in the deck, and I shuffled, and then I spread them out on the table, and I said, do you see your card? And he just said,
like
yes, it's right there. And I was like, oh, okay, that trick's done. I actually did sometimes use the voice. But you were talking about being inspired. And yes, we had these big named inspirations, the magicians that everybody has heard of. But at Al's Magic Shop, I noticed something. The first time I went in, and I was 11 when the first time I walked into the store, I was so excited to find it because I'd heard all of these magicians had, been there and, used them as a supplier and what have you. And I walked in and I started looking around, and I have to admit, those magicians who were quite a bit older than me, and there were several who clearly had been there a lot, were very wary of me. And they weren't friendly at all. And I was just going around, and I was, this 11-year-old kid, just, nervous to be there, excited to be there, but they weren't friendly at all. And I actually left, and it was kind of a bad experience. I thought it would be a little more like I'm joining a fraternity or something like that. And I had a very good friend who was a magician a little older than I was. He was 18, and he was, bursting out on the scene, if you will. And he just said, the problem is you went in and you just looked around. And he said, they looked at you as someone who was trying to find out how magic tricks are done. And then he gave me a little tip. He gave me a deck of cards, and he said, I want you to go in and try to do a basic fan with these cards. And he said, mess it up. And then walk in and say to all of them, I'm trying to get this fan down for this trick, but I can't do it. And I did it. And it was the following Saturday when I went in to do that. And all of them became really friendly. And they said, hey, let me show you this. Let me give you a tip. And just the fact that I was somebody trying to learn to be a magician, not just trying to learn how to do tricks, made all the difference in the world.
Well, my experience with fellow magicians has always there are two poles, and that's it. There's either they are standoffish and I don't want to. I don't even want to be around them, and they clearly don't want to be around me, or they are the friendliest, most helpful people in the world who will, give you whatever to help you get better at what you're doing. And that's the interesting thing. And I've for the most part found there are a lot more of the latter of those, they're going to do whatever to help you be better at you. I've got a DVD of a lecture given by another magician I loved, a man named Tommy Wonder. I've got so many of my idols are dead. It's so sad.
You must pass on the knowledge, my son.
They've got to stop dying. That's the problem.
You're a Jedi. Yeah.
Well, Houdini, he kept trying to come back. He promised he would.
And in this lecture, he talks about, and he makes a joke about expensive lecture notes, which is a single sheet of paper that just says everything I know I learned from these books. And then he pulls out this big thing where he's actually typed up notes on everything he's going to talk about and directions on how to do all these things he talks about. And he's like, this is free. And he says, because it's like, well, you can't use it exactly how I do it because it's not suited to your act and your personality and all of that. So, it's free. And that's on this video that I was watching. I'm just like, my goodness, what a, that strange generosity. I'm going to help you just be better at what you're doing. And, in many professions, something like that could be seen as, you're hurting yourself by giving away what you're doing. But I like the way one of the books I bought when I was first getting back in is by a magician named Joshua Jay, and he writes in the beginning, he says, exposing secrets of tricks is bad. So you're probably going to say, why am I writing this book? Isn't that exposure? He says, no, this book is teaching. It's education. And what's the difference? And he says the difference is effort on your part. You bought the book. You picked it up. You're reading it. You are exerting an effort to learn, and so I'm giving you the knowledge. Whereas, turning on the television to see The Masked Magician back in the day, that's not really, that took no effort. That show bugs me on a different level now than it did when it was on.
Right.
Partly because there are some of those tricks where I'm like, well, I do that trick. And that's not how I do it.
Yeah.
But everybody thinks that's how I'm doing it because they saw that show. Or at least, everybody of the 3 people that remember that show and or watched it. And
I started watching that show. And it was actually last summer. I stayed away from it. And, I was just going through Netflix. And, Netflix goes through these droughts of nothing good on it. Yeah. Sorry, Netflix executives that are listening. But I came across it. And I thought, I'm going to give it a shot because Penn and Teller had made a career and have sort of redefined the stigma of giving away tricks, even though there is a lot of animosity towards what they've done out there still in the magic community. But I started watching it, and I'll tell you, I got an episode and a half in, and I just stopped. I'm not going to lie, I was disgusted by how shallow this was. It was revealing the trick for the purpose of selling this show versus, like you were saying, even Penn and Teller really celebrating the art and the craft.
I've heard Penn. I've also heard Teller talk. But I've heard
Me
Penn
too.
Talking about how that part of their philosophy is that if the secret of how you do the trick is more interesting than the trick, that's a bad trick. And when I heard him say that, it suddenly clicked. I'm like, well, that's how they differentiate between the ones they're going to tell you and the ones they don't, because there are still some tricks they don't reveal.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I'm like, yeah, that was the difference. And I think that show was shallow on so many levels. The narrator drives me crazy now. And the way he keeps talking about all the women that are the assistants. I'm just like, this is shallow. Like, it just bothered me as I tried to, because I did try to watch it again on Netflix. And I thought, well, maybe I can learn a couple things. And I'm like, no. And it was just, so many things I didn't like that were going on in that show that just, I'm like, never mind the reveal of the secrets, everything about this show and everything, and the way that the host would say at the end is like, and now they can't fool you again. I'm like,
well, that's
totally the wrong attitude.
Yeah.
I'm like,
well, and that's I will tell you, to take this just a little slightly different turn, there is an arrogance that's wonderful that you never want to lose, not of the magician, but of the audience. And I'll tell you, you always know that person who, when you're doing a trick, a card trick, And you look at their face, and they have on their face, yeah, I know how to do that. You know, there's kind of that arrogance. But there's also fear in knowing how something is done. I'll tell you, so I had the pleasure, and yes, this is a segue to a very arrogant story, I will tell you, or no, a personal story. I had the pleasure of performing for Teller, actually, and this was 2 years ago in a show called The Coconuts. At the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
I saw that.
And part of it, I played Harvey, you know, Harvey Yates, a very kind gentleman, not by any means. And I had to do some sleight of hand with Tasso Feldman, who played Harpo Marx. And it was a very simple comedic thing of where I was going to put some money in my pocket, and he was going to put his pocket where my pocket was, unbeknownst to me, and I had to put it in his pocket instead. And it was a little bit of palming, the money and such, and, you know, we worked on it for quite a while. And usually I don't get nervous at all when I find out somebody's out in the audience, somebody I know, or even a celebrity or something. But when I found out that Teller was out there in the audience, he was friends with an actor in the festival, I have to admit, that was the only night I screwed up that sleight of hand beyond belief. And Tasso he never let me, you know, live it down for the rest of the summer. But it was because Teller was out there, and all I had in my mind was, I got to get this right. I got to get this right. I got to get this right. I screwed that up.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, do you have a particular audience that you enjoy performing for more than others?
I love performing for a mixed audience of adults and children. I like I do really covet those chances when I can perform for just adults. There's something very different, and I by no means is my stuff an adult show. I don't go blue. Every now and then I think of what would be a wonderful inappropriate joke to make in a magic show. I'm like, well, that was hilarious, and I'm never gonna use it. So if I ever find a magician who does that, I'm like, I've got a list of jokes you can have because I'm never gonna use them. But yeah. And I do and I enjoy getting to play for, you know, just grown up because you can handle things in a very different way. But there's a certain pleasure with I did a birthday party a little over a year ago, and all the parents were coming to me afterwards just telling me how much they enjoyed it too. They weren't expecting to get so engrossed by the children's birthday magician, and even were saying, we forgot to take pictures because we were watching your show. And that was something that I thought was really good. And I love that. I love the taking that being able to do that moment where, you know, the parents think they're just there to take their kids and realize that, no, they're there to be entertained just as much. And that's something that I get a lot of fun out of.
So do you have a website someone can go to if
I
they want to?
I have a website. I'm in the process of redesigning it right now. But and that's treypatterson.weebly.com/magic. The whole website is just devoted to me as an actor and a filmmaker, and so there are many things. If you go to the /magic, that's specifically me as a magic. If you just go to treypatterson.weebly.com, the homepage will can lead you around, and you'll see, you know, some of the shows. I think I list all the shows I've ever done on the website, what pictures I have, links to some of my films that are on YouTube. You can get through all that and get to the page for magic. And
so people can hire you?
People can hire me, yes.
Parties?
Yes. I've done a handful of birthday parties. I just did a Christmas party a couple of weeks ago. Actually, just a week ago tomorrow night, I did a Christmas party. And so I do some things like that. I'm trying to get into more. More of that is a lot more fun too. If there's one thing I don't like as much about the street performances, it's a little more limiting in what tricks I can do because everything has to be either instant or, you know, quickly reset. You know, I can't do something like, you know, like my magic show in a box. That makes a big mess that I can't clean up to do again immediately after. Or for instance, this past summer I did shows for the Washington County libraries. All the branches of the libraries.
Wow.
Which meant at most I had 2 days where I had 3 show days because the bigger branches wanted 2 shows each because they had so many people coming. And then the smaller branches, the New Harmony and stuff like that. So I'd do a show a day where I had the 2 shows at a big branch and then had to drive off to New Harmony, or actually it was I did Santa Clara and then drove out to Enterprise. I did Hurricane and drove up to Hilldale on those days, and so the whole show got planned around that fact that everything, I wasn't always going to have a long time to clean and pack everything back up afterwards, that I was going to have to, on those two, in the big branches, I was going to have to be able to clean it all up, throw it back in the case, and start the show again in an hour. and start the show again in an hour. And on those 3 show days, I would have to do that twice, throw it all in the case, load it in the car, drive, in some cases, a half hour to an hour, like to Enterprise, drive like an hour, get out there, unpack, set it up, and go again.
Wow.
And so there were some tricks that when I was first hired, I was thinking I was going to do that I'm just like, no, I can't clean that up and pack it up in that time. And certain things that I'm just like, boy, that would just go through way too much stuff with the number of shows.
Well, now our audience can catch you at the Dickens Festival tonight.
Yes, tonight and then tomorrow.
Tomorrow night. And then if they are not able to get to the Dickens Festival, you have a show coming up.
Yes, with Improv Dixie, because I am not the only magician in Improv Dixie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's another one of our performers, Patrick. I want to say Weeks.
Patrick Weeks.
If he's listening, I apologize for forgetting your last name, Patrick.
Great.
He's also a magician. And Chewy has experience with clowning and things, and he knows some magic.
And we've had Chewy on the show,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact.
And so he came up with the fact that at least 3 of us knew some magic, and he has another friend who's going to join us to do a magic trick as well, so that there'll be 4 of us that'll perform some magic interspersed with improv games.
And what date is this?
This is December 22nd. Okay. And with Improv Dixie, we always do a 7 o'clock PG show for the whole family. And then a 9 o'clock R show.
Great. So you can use those jokes in the 9 o'clock
Yeah, I could if I wanted to. I probably want. Well, and the way Chewy always puts it is the R show, it's not our job to take it R. We approach it the same way it's a PG show. It's just that, it's improv. We take the suggestions of the audience.
The energy
so now
from the audience.
The audience will determine how R-rated it's going to get. And we're just,
I was rather pure at the last one, so yeah.
At PG, there are certain, we discourage certain suggestions, and there are certain ones that we are just not going to take, even if people offer them. At R, there is none of that. It's, and so it really is up to the audience how far it goes into that rabbit hole.
That's great.
Well, as is always the case with all of our guests, I'm sorry to say that we are out of time for this episode of On the Arts. But I do encourage you, come to the Dickens Festival, not only for the experience of walking around in Dickensian London, but look for Trey Patterson.
Check out the magic.
And I have to tell you, watching you perform, Trey, and I have seen you a few times on various occasions over the last 7-8 years, the look on the children's faces is enough. And I cannot emphasize enough, and this is why we're doing the show, this is why we talk to the people that we do, that look of amazement, that look of joy on children's faces is something that can go into adulthood with all of these forms of art, whether it be magic or music or theater. And we hope everybody will have an opportunity to experience that. Thank you so much for listening to us today.
Trey.
On this coming Tuesday, we have Deward Wilson with a tremendous number of stories in his career spanning several
worked
decades.
With Billy Joel.
Billy
we're
Joel,
excited to hear those stories.
He has wonderful war stories of being a roadie. And then we have Sherilyn Davis on Thursday to talk about the arts in St. George before we take a break over the holiday again and then pick up again in January. But until you hear from us again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you keep your focus on the arts.
Bye.